it is only one place, only one house that is sounding the trumpet, ringing the alarm, calling 911. We are telling the world that Yahweh is not a God, nor is he the so-called one true God. We are blowing the whistle on these scrupulous men who call themselves Hebrew scribes, who instead of preserving the pure words of Yahweh intact for all the world, that's the opportunity they had. They defiled it by engaging in the worst identity theft in all human history. They effectively scratched out the holy name of Yahweh and replaced it with the satanic word Elohim, translated God, and Adonai, translated Lord. And that's not all they did. They've also tactfully mistranslated words, Hebrew words, to purposely give the impression that Yahweh is just another God. But the word God or Elohim was never used in the original manuscripts to describe Yahweh. That's the key. Okay? And that's what I want you to see here today. Now on the subject of the biblical manuscripts. It is generally accepted by biblical scholars that there are essentially four main sources or manuscripts of the Holy Scriptures. And they have been designated or assigned four letters: J, E, P, and D. If you're like most people, you probably never heard of this before. In fact, most Christians don't even go beyond what is written on the pages of the Bible that they have in their hand, not knowing that the translators had their own agenda when they translated the scriptures. So just that you know, I'm not making this up. Let's read from the Encyclopedia Judaica, volume 13, page 234, which states under the subheading, Sources. The opinion accepted in contemporary biblical research is that Pentateuchal literature is composed of four major sources: J, E, P, and D. I want you to see that. Now, why do they call these manuscripts J, E, P, and D? For this information, we turn to the Encyclopedia Britannica, volume 2, page 194, under the subheading, Biblical Sources. The names by which these sources are now known listen to this now, in chronological order. In other words, the order in which they came first in time. That's what chronological mean. So let's read this again. The names by which these sources are known in chronological order are the Yahwist or J source. Notice that. That came first. So called because it employed as the Lord's name the Hebrew word translated into English as YHWH and spoken as Yahweh. Then comes the Elohist or the E source, distinguished by its reference to the Lord as Elohim. Notice that. The E source came after the J. The Elohist or the E source distinguished by its reference to the Lord as Elohim. Then followed by the Deuteronomist or the D source, marked by distinctive vocabulary and style, and then the priestly code or P, the P source, which contains detailed ritual instructions. Now, we will focus on the J and the E sources from now on, from this point on. The Encyclopedia Judaica, volume 13, page 234, gives us this additional information here. The distinction between J and E is based primarily on the different usage of the divine name in these sources. YHWH in the J, and Elohim, God. You see that? You see where it came from? You see where the word God came from? Elohim in the E. But remember, the earliest manuscripts is the J, which has Yahweh. Okay? It goes on to tell us under the subheading J and E sources. This difference between J and E is most evident in Genesis, where it is based on an explicit criterion, YHWH in J, as opposed to Elohim in the E. In other words, in Genesis, Yahweh was used exclusively. Now, before analyzing these facts, I want to also show you again that the J source is the earlier source. And I want to show you this from a different reference source. In this case, the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible, Volume 2, page 777, which tells us this. J, one of the principal narrative sources or strata of the Pentateuch. It is commonly, notice that, commonly regarded as Judahite in origin and somewhat earlier than E, 10th to 9th century BC. So we see here again that the J manuscript, which was the earliest manuscript, employed the name Yahweh exclusively, where the E source, which came later, okay, used the name Elohim. Just so that you understand clearly, the E source also used Yahweh, but it also used Elohim to describe Yahweh. You see, that's the key. The J source never used Elohim to describe Yahweh. It is clear to see, therefore, my friends, that it was in the E source that Satan started stealing the identity of Yahweh and started painting Yahweh as an Elohim or a God. The etymology, even the etymology, my friends, of the word Elohim traces back to something that was made or carved out of stone or wood. It can never be used to describe Yahweh. Yahweh did not have a beginning. He does not have a beginning. The gods do. It's like saying that Yahweh is a dog. You know, it's an insult. Please, I don't want you to miss this point. The Encyclopedia Judaica showed us that the J source used Yahweh exclusively in the book of Genesis. What do you find in the book of Genesis? The story of creation. This is why people are confused and cannot figure out why Elohim, a plural word, I want you to notice that, it's a plural word, was used in Genesis chapter 1 verse 27, where the subject was clearly singular. I want you to notice this from the King James Version now. Genesis chapter 1 verse 27 states, so God, and we put in here, Elohim, which is plural, and you can find that out very easily, okay, created man in his is singular. So there's a disconnect right here in this verse, right away. Okay? God, plural, created in his image, singular. In his own image, in the image of God, plural, he, again, singular, created him. Singular again. Male and female. He, again, singular, created them. I want you to notice that. The his and the he mentioned in Genesis chapter 1 verse 27 is talking about Yahweh, not Elohim.